Lila sat in the kitchen, the familiar smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee filling the air. It should have been a warm, comforting morning, but the silence was thick, stifling. Her mother stood by the sink, washing dishes, her back turned, as if pretending nothing was happening. Her father, across the table, sat with his hands folded, his lips pressed tight, avoiding eye contact. Her older sister, Maria, was absent. Lila could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke, ready to ignite. So, her mother began, finally breaking the silence, her voice tight but controlled. "You've made your decision, then?" Lila clenched her fists beneath the table, a knot of frustration tightening in her chest. It had been days since she told them about her decision, days since the argument had started, and yet they still hadn't let it go. She wasn't sure whether it was the betrayal in their eyes or the disappointment that stung more. "Yes, I made my decision," Lila said, her voice steady but with an edge of defiance. "I told you, I can't just let go of my guy friends." Her mother turned around slowly, her expression unreadable. "And why not, Lila? Why is it so impossible for you to choose between them and Ethan?" Lila's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Ethan. He hadn't been in the picture for long, just over a year, but in that time, he'd become her anchor. He was steady, dependable, the complete opposite of her more unpredictable, chaotic friendships with her guy friends. Ethan had proposed just 2 weeks ago, hoping to solidify their future together. But Lila hadn't said yes. Not because she didn't love him, but because she couldn't quite shake the fear that something was missing, that something wasn't right. But telling her family that was impossible. To them, it made no sense. They didn't understand her deep, complex bond with her guy friends. To them, it was just an excuse to avoid commitment. To her, it was the only thing that had kept her grounded all these years. She needed her friends. "Why is this so hard for you to understand?" Lila asked, her voice rising now. "My friendships with them are important to me. I can't just give them up because I'm supposed to choose between them and Ethan. I'm not going to throw them away for the sake of one relationship." Her mother's lips tightened further. "And what do you think will happen, Lila? You keep choosing these friendships, these men, and what happens when you're alone? What happens when you realize you've pushed everyone away and you're left with nothing?" Lila stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not choosing between them. I'm not choosing between my friends and a man. Why can't you just accept that I need both?" "Because it's not normal." Her father's voice finally broke through the tension, sharp and filled with frustration. "It's not healthy to rely on friendships like that when you're in a relationship. Relationships take priority. Ethan takes priority. You can't keep living like this, with these men always around, always the ones you run to for comfort." Lila shook her head. "You don't get it," she whispered, more to herself than to her father. "Ethan doesn't get it either." Her mother's gaze softened, a hint of something resembling pity in her eyes. "You think you're some kind of martyr, Lila. That you're sacrificing something great for the sake of keeping your friendships intact. But you're not. You're just afraid to let go. You're afraid to let go of what you know because you're too scared of change." Lila's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of her mother's words, the hurt that lay beneath them. She wasn't afraid of change, though. She was afraid of being alone. "I'm not afraid," Lila said quietly, though even she didn't fully believe it. I can't lose them. I can't." The room fell silent again. Her mother resumed washing the dishes, and Lila could feel the distance growing wider, the space between them stretching to the point where it seemed irreparable. She had made her choice. She had told them that she wouldn't give up her guy friends, but it felt like now she was losing everything: Ethan, her family, even herself. "I've made my choice, and I'm not going back on it," Lila said firmly, though her heart felt heavier with each passing second. Her father looked up at her, his face a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "Then you've made your bed, Lila. And you'll have to lie in it." Lila could feel the weight of that statement press down on her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure whether it was the family's rejection or the realization that she had just made a huge mistake that hurt more. Her mind raced. Had she made the right decision? Had she really chosen her friends over everything that was supposed to matter? Her mother sighed, turning back to the sink. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do," Lila replied, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her confidence. She left the kitchen then, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway as she went upstairs to her room. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she pulled it out, hoping for a distraction, a sign that things could still be okay. It was a message from Ethan. "We need to talk." Lila swallowed hard, her finger hovering over the screen. She knew what this meant. It was the end of the line. The end of everything. The end of the future she had envisioned with him. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, she typed a quick reply. "I can't right now. Maybe later." As she set the phone down on her bedside table, Lila realized something. Her decision had already been made. But now, she had to live with the consequences. Lila spent the next few days in a blur, her life feeling like it was slowly unraveling. The silence at home had settled into something colder, more final. Her parents spoke only when necessary, and even then, their words felt heavy with unspoken judgment. Her sister, Maria, hadn't spoken to her since the confrontation. It was as though her entire world had shrunk to the four walls of her bedroom, where she spent her time avoiding the outside world. She had tried to reach out to Ethan, but he hadn't responded to her messages. Not that she could blame him. He had been the one who had wanted more, the one who had wanted to build a future together. And she had pushed him away, telling him that her friendships with her guy friends were more important than their relationship. Now, she was paying the price. Lila sat at her desk, staring at the screen of her laptop. She should be working, should be doing something productive, but all she could think about was the emptiness that had crept into her life. It wasn't just Ethan and her family. It was the absence of the connections that had once filled her up, the bond with her friends that had seemed so natural, so unbreakable. Daniel's face flashed in her mind. He had always been there for her, always the one to lend an ear when things went wrong. He was the one who understood her the best, but she never once considered that there could be more between them. A knock on the door jolted her from her thoughts. She stood quickly, surprised. She hadn't expected anyone. When she opened the door, she found Daniel standing there, his usual easy smile replaced by something more serious. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Lila hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready to face him, not after everything. But she nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "I don't even know where to start," Daniel said, pacing around the room for a moment before sitting down on the edge of her bed. His eyes flickered toward her, almost uncertain. I don't know what happened. I thought we were fine, you know? But this whole thing with Ethan, with your family, it feels like everything's just falling apart." Lila sat down beside him, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "It is falling apart. I made a mistake, Daniel. I thought I could have everything, but now I don't have anything." Daniel's gaze softened, and he turned toward her. "You didn't make a mistake, Lila. You wanted things that felt right to you. I understand that. But you can't expect to have everything and not make a sacrifice somewhere along the line. Lila's throat tightened. She wanted to believe that everything could somehow fall into place again, that her world wouldn't remain in the state of suspended chaos. But she knew that things were changing, and it felt like she was losing control. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to lose my family or Ethan. I just didn't want to give up the friendships I have with you, with the others. It's not about them being more important, it's about... I don't know how to explain it. These friendships are a part of me, Daniel." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, a sadness, maybe, but also something else. Something she couldn't quite place. "You're important to me, Lila," he said, his voice steady but laden with emotion. "And I know you feel the same way. I just wish you would let me in. Let me help you through this." Lila felt a sharp pang in her chest at his words. She hadn't realized until now how much she had been keeping from him, how much she had built up around her heart to protect herself from whatever it was she was afraid of. But now, with him sitting there, so close, the walls felt like they were starting to crack. "Daniel, I don't know what to do," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I've lost everything. Ethan doesn't want to talk to me, my family is angry with me, and I feel so alone." Daniel leaned forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "I'm here. I'm always here." Lila swallowed, her mind racing. She knew that Daniel had always been there for her, but this felt different. His touch, the closeness, it stirred something deep inside her, something she hadn't fully acknowledged before. Was this what she had been afraid of? The possibility of something more? Could she risk everything, her friendships, her family, her future, for the sake of something unknown, something that might not even last? She pulled away slightly, her heart pounding. "I can't think straight right now. I don't know what's happening, Daniel. I just know I can't keep living like this." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know, Lila. I know. But whatever happens, you're not alone in this. I'll be here for you, no matter what." Lila looked at him, and for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of something like hope. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by the harsh reality of everything she had to face. After Daniel left, Lila sat alone in her room, staring at the space where he had been. She felt a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, confusion, fear. But there was something else too, something unfamiliar and unsettling, longing. She longed for the peace she had once known, for the certainty that had come from her family, from Ethan. But most of all, she longed for the clarity that had been so easy to ignore until now. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the messages between her and Ethan. There were dozens of unread texts, but one stood out. "I still love you. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to keep going like this." Lila closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words crush her chest. She had hurt him, pushed him away, and now he was gone. Her world had crumbled beneath her, and she couldn't seem to rebuild it. But as she looked at Daniel's words, something shifted in her. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that everything was fine. Maybe it was time to stop running from what was right in front of her. The phone vibrated again. Another message. From Maria. "We need to talk." Lila stared at the message, her stomach twisting in knots. This was the moment. The moment everything changed. Lila stood frozen in front of her phone, her finger hovering over the screen. The message from Maria had sent a wave of nausea through her. "We need to talk. What could Maria possibly want now? After everything that had happened, after the silent treatment, the betrayal, could anything she had to say make a difference? She couldn't ignore it. The tension between them had been building since the argument with their parents, but now, it seemed inevitable. It was time for this confrontation. There was no avoiding it any longer. With a deep breath, Lila gathered herself and typed a quick reply. When? Maria responded almost immediately, I'll be at your place in 15. Lila dropped the phone onto the bed, her hands shaking. The moment was coming. She didn't know if she was ready, but she knew it had to happen. For the past few days, she had been trapped in a spiral of guilt and confusion. She had made the decision to hold on to her friendships, to reject the expectations her family had placed on her, but now, she was standing on the edge of something she hadn't anticipated, a rift so deep between her and her sister that it seemed impossible to bridge. As she waited for Maria's arrival, Lila felt her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind kept drifting back to Daniel's words, to the way he had stood by her, offering support when she had needed it most. She hadn't known how to deal with the complexity of her emotions, but he had been there, steady and unwavering. She wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not, if it was just another way to avoid the pain of facing her true feelings. When the doorbell rang, Lila's stomach tightened even more. She made her way down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. She opened the door to find Maria standing there, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mix of hesitation and determination. Hey, Maria said softly, avoiding eye contact. Can we talk? Lila nodded and stepped aside to let her sister in. They stood in the living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them. Lila could feel the weight of everything unsaid, all the years of rivalry and hidden resentments crashing down on them in this one moment. Maria sat down on the couch, and Lila took a seat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. I didn't want it to be like this, Maria began, her voice cracking. I didn't want to hurt you, Lila. I didn't know how else to handle it. Lila's brow furrowed. Handle what, Maria? Maria's eyes darted to the floor, unable to meet Lila's gaze. Ethan. I never meant for it to happen. I swear. It wasn't planned, but, when you pushed him away, when you made your choice, Lila's breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? I didn't mean for it to happen, Maria repeated, her voice breaking. But Ethan and we started talking more. You were so distant, Lila, so wrapped up in your guy friends. I thought maybe if Lila stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. So you just went behind my back? Her voice trembled with anger, a heat rising in her chest. You knew how important he was to me, Maria. You knew how hard it was for me to decide, I know. Maria interrupted, her voice desperate. But you weren't there, Lila. You kept choosing them, your friends. And when you turned Ethan down, when you shut him out, I thought, maybe if he found comfort somewhere else, maybe it would help both of you move on. But I never expected to fall for him. It just happened. And I'm so sorry. Lila stared at her sister in stunned silence, her mind reeling. The words were too much to process. Maria, her own sister, had betrayed her in the worst possible way, by taking the one thing that had meant the most to her. You took him from me, Lila said, her voice barely a whisper, the hurt cutting deeper than any words could describe. Maria stood up too, walking over to Lila with a look of regret on her face. I didn't take him from you, Lila. You let him go. You pushed him away. And I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know what else to do, but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lila felt a flood of emotions, betrayal, heartbreak, confusion, crash over her all at once. It wasn't just the fact that Maria had been with Ethan. It was that she had failed to see the cracks in her own relationships, the ways in which she had pushed everyone away, convinced that she could balance it all. And now, here she was alone, with no one to turn to. "Why didn't you just talk to me, Maria?" Lila asked, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me what was going on? Why did you have to do this behind my back?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were happy, Lila. I thought you didn't need anyone else. I thought you were fine with your friends, with everything the way it was. But I was wrong. I didn't see how much it was hurting you. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." Lila shook her head, a lump forming in her throat. "I was never fine. I was never happy. I was just afraid. Afraid that if I let go of one thing, I would lose it all. I pushed you away, and I pushed Ethan away, and now everything is broken." Maria stepped forward, her arms outstretched. But Lila pulled back, shaking her head. "No, Maria. You've already done enough." For a long moment, they stood there, the weight of everything between them pressing down like an unbearable weight. Lila wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but instead, she felt hollow, empty and broken. There was no way to undo the damage, no way to put things back together. Finally, Maria spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I do want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for things to turn out like this." Lila stood motionless, staring at the floor. "I know." Maria turned to leave, and Lila watched her go, the door closing with a soft click behind her. For the first time in days, Lila felt an overwhelming sense of finality. It wasn't just the end of her relationship with Ethan or her bond with her family, it was the end of something she had fought so hard to hold on to. The friendships, the connections, the certainty that everything would always work out, it was gone. But as the silence enveloped her, Lila realized something: she couldn't keep living in the past. She couldn't keep fighting for things that no longer existed. The truth was, she needed to let go, not just of her relationships, but of her fear, her guilt, and the desperate need to control everything. It was time to rebuild, from the ground up. And this time, Lila would do it on her own terms. As she sat on the couch, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Daniel. "You okay?" Lila stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But then, with a deep breath, she typed back. "I'm getting there." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it.